And just as a reminder, wherever you can, this being present together, albeit online, is very important as a community of love. So where you can, have your video on. I know it's not always possible, but it is very embracing, if you like, to see one another together. So let's just prepare. O God, come to our assistance. O Lord, make haste to help us. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen. This is the reading that Father Laurence has chosen from the Rule of St. Benedict, chapter 3. And I think it's important to read this whole chapter out, because the title of Father Lawrence's talk is Why the Rule is a Wisdom Text for all ages, for all of us now. So chapter 3, Summoning the Brothers for Council. As often as anything important is to be done in the monastery, the abbot shall call the whole community together and explain what the business is. And after hearing the advice of the brothers and sisters, let him ponder and follow what he judges the wiser course. The reason why we have said all should be called for counsel is that the Lord often reveals what is better to the younger. The brothers and sisters, for their part, are to express their opinions with all humility and not presume to defend their views obstinately. The decision is rather the abbot's to make, so that when he has determined what is more prudent, all may obey. Nevertheless, just as it is proper for disciples to obey their master, so it is becoming for the master on his part to settle everything with foresight and fairness. Accordingly, in every instance, all are to follow the teaching of the rule, and no one shall rashly deviate from it. In the monastery, no one is to follow his own heart's desire, nor shall anyone presume to contend with his abbot defiantly or outside the monastery. Should anyone presume to do so, let him/her be subjected to the discipline of the rule. Moreover, the abbot himself must fear God and keep the rule in everything he does. He can be sure beyond any doubt that he will have to give an account of all his judgments to God, the most just of judges. If less important business of the monastery is to be transacted, he shall take counsel with the seniors only. As it is written, do everything with counsel, and you will not be sorry afterwards. Heavenly Father, open our hearts to the silent presence of the Spirit of your Son. Lead us into that mysterious silence where your love is revealed to all who call. Maranatha, come, Lord Jesus. So I have a smile on my face because this is always such a joy to be able to welcome Father Laurence. But in the absence of a biography, I want to just remind Father Laurence of something that happened 12 years ago when I was the national coordinator for the UK. I met with Father Laurence and he asked me if we could purchase a castle for £1. And he was serious. And I was shocked. And I had little faith and little trust in God. Laurence didn't. And what we now have from his immense trust and faith in God is Bonvo. And the growth of WCCM across the world, in all corners of the world and in all places. So it is with absolute love and gratitude that I welcome Laurence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janet. Well, it would have saved us a lot of money if you had said yes. But there were many complications. I think you had a wise response to that idea. Welcome from us all here at Bonvo on this beautiful summer day. We've just said goodbye at 5 o'clock this morning to 35 Canadian meditators who've been here for a week. It was a wonderful retreat. The theme was the art of friendship. And it was an art I think we all succeeded in. There was a wonderful spirit of friendship, of silence, and of sharing, and of celebration. So we're having a little quiet time after that. What I'd like to talk about today and is the rule. And I suggested we look at chapter 3, which Janet read at the beginning, calling the brethren to council, because what I'd like to talk about is, why is the rule a wisdom document? And not just a historical wisdom document, but a wisdom document. That means a source of wisdom for us and for all ages in terms of young or old, but also every historical period. And it's remarkable that it is, because when you look at the rule, it doesn't look that wise, perhaps. It's dealing with quite, apart from the prologue, which sets out the basic principles of the life that Benedict was living and training people to live. But the rest is practicalities. How to live, not why or where or anything else, but how. And I think this particular chapter, in a way, summarizes the whole spirit of the rule. He's talking about how to run a community in a wise way, in an efficient way, and in a humane way, by making sure that everybody is involved in the decision making. We can discuss, if we had time, we could discuss whether that is democratic in our sense of the word. But what is democratic? Today, many people are tired of democracy because it seems to have failed, and they feel they have no input into the big decisions of our time. And of course there are, and that is very dangerous. We saw what's happened in Spain. It's a hung parliament, fortunately for most of us, we would agree, avoiding a far-right coalition government. But that's what's happened in Israel. In the name of democracy, they somehow put together a far-right political and religious fundamentalist government, which is about to dismantle the rule of law by subjecting the judges and the judiciary system to the government. It's on the way to becoming Russia. So what is democracy? And I think you might say, well, let's not talk about politics, let's talk about spirituality. The spirituality includes politics. It includes social justice. We know that we can't escape from the challenges and the responsibilities of life into a cloister mentality where we close the doors. There are different kinds of cloister. There's the cloister where you close the door and keep the world out, or there's a cloister where you create a spiritual space of freedom and love and hospitality, but it's a distinct space, and it's characterized by silence, by moderation, but also by joy and celebration. But and that is a kind of an open cloister. So there are different kinds of cloister, and there are different kinds of democracy. And the challenge that we all confront today around the world in a very critical way, in a very urgent way, is what kind of world are we going to have? What kind of world do we want? And if you don't know what you want, then you'll get what somebody else wants, and they'll impose it on you. And that's what's happening with populism. So let's look at what the rule tells us about calling the brethren to council in a 6th century monastery. What wisdom does that have for us as humanity today, and also for our families and our communities and our countries and our local governments and every other aspect of what makes us social beings? Well, it's amazing that this little rule for beginners, as Benedict calls it, is still being talked about in the way we are, and that oblates in particular enjoy and are nourished by on a daily basis as they read a little bit of the rule every morning, every day, as we do here in Bordeaux, and then reflect on it together and gradually absorb that wisdom in the rule so that it affects the way we live and react and make decisions. I noticed the other day, I read somewhere 153,000 books were published in the UK alone last year. So why is the little rule of Benedict, written in the 6th century, why is it being continuously in print? Born in the Dark Ages of Europe, after the collapse of Roman civilization, it was written out of lived experience. It was a lay community, not a clerical, hierarchical community. He was a little bit suspicious of priests joining, but he welcomed them to join. But Benedict himself was not a priest. He was not part of the hierarchy. And monasticism has never, in that sense, really essentially been part of the hierarchy. And we'll see in how this chapter describes that. And what the Pope is doing at the moment, trying to create a synodal church. That means a church that is governed as a whole with consultation and listening to the voice of everybody at the grassroots. This is a long, difficult process when you're talking about a global religion or global church. But that's what's happening. That's what has been happening. And he is very, very clearly trying to reshape the mentality of the church from being a rigid hierarchy with an infallible pope and layers and layers and layers of religious clerical hierarchy and the subordination or the marginalization of women. This is a painful rebirth of Christianity in our time, not just in the Catholic Church. But the Catholic Church takes a very inspiring lead in this, I think. For example, on Thursday, I'm leaving for Portugal to join 22 of our young adult meditators who are taking part in the World Youth Day. And the World Youth Day is organized by the Catholic Church globally, and every so often it meets in a particular city. And it's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of young people, I think, so something like between the ages of 16 and 30 come to take part in this fest of youth and spiritual sharing and celebration. And the organizers of it have and Pope have said very clearly, this is not only for Catholics, this is for all young people to come. No one will be turned away. So I think that the rule of Saint Benedict, born, as I said, in the collapse of one civilization, but went on to shape the values and institutions that we live with today. And I think it can also help us through the dark ages that we are very obviously going through ourselves. The collapse of civilized values, the collapse of social organization, the collapse of basic principles of economic and social justice in many cases, and the huge pressures facing democracy, which we may well suicidally destroy. So I think the rule can help us through these dark ages and reshape our ideas about how to live, the reasons for living, because how we live is going to be shaped by why, what is the meaning, what are our values, because we need to be in touch with those values and meanings if we are to make decisions. And that's what calling the brethren to council is about, coming to a decision. For example, let's say a decision about how to save the planet environmentally. We have the money to do it. We have this technology to do it. We don't have the mind to do it. That's the problem. How do we come to this kind of decision? And how can the rule of Saint Benedict reshape our ideas of how to live, the reasons, and the organization and structures that we need for our survival and flourishing? I'm not being fundamentalist about the rule of Saint Benedict. I don't expect all the United Nations to add it to the Declaration of Human Rights. But nevertheless, if there is a strong critical mass of people like ourselves who have drunk from this well and are inspired by it, then we can be people in organizations and at the voting booth who bring that wisdom to bear upon our own time. So let's just look at briefly, let's go through that chapter that Janet read for us at the beginning. When something important is to be done in the monastery. So I don't know, building something, making some decision about taking on new members, or how the monastery is going to survive in financial challenges. Those sort of decisions, important decisions. The whole community should be called together by the abbot, and then he should explain why they're there. So there's order in that. There's authority. The abbot decides when that kind of meeting should take place. But there's also equality. Everyone is called. And you remember he says, everyone should be listened to. There's a deep listening going on, and he has to listen, but everybody has to listen to each other. And including the young, that means not just the young in age, but also the new members of the community who are young in rank, in order in the community. Everybody should be listened to, because God can reveal what is best to the young, because they haven't got so much baggage, so many filters, so much, complexity. So, and there's accountability. Everyone is accountable to each other and to the rule. So this is a form of democracy, it seems to me. It's not the democracy of first past the post, who gets the most votes. You win by, like Brexit, you win by 1% or 2%, and that changes everything. It's not that kind of democracy, but it is, it seems to me, a real democracy. But it depends, of course, for its success on certain basic principles and upon leadership, good leadership. And it is the whole community that is called together. So it is inclusive, and there's an equality in that. But he also speaks about the way in which they will discuss things, the nature of the discourse, we might say, the social discourse. In our time, social discourse has become a shouting match, and a vicious shouting match. It's angry, it's demeaning, it's insulting. I don't know if you I just was reading in the paper about Nigel Farage complaining that something that he was not given a bank account. But I remember that clip of him standing up in the European Parliament and delivering this awful, disgusting, shameful, uncivilized, personal attack upon the new, at the time, the newly appointed president of the European Council. Just a personal laceration and insult. I could not understand why he wasn't. If it happened in the House of Commons, he would have been dragged out. I couldn't understand how it could do it. And I'm not saying that just because the person he insulted is a meditator now in our community. Anyway, that's, that in a way, in an extreme way, characterizes the sort of social media discourse that we have ended up with. But for Benedict, when we speak and when we discuss our different opinions, we should do so, he says, with humility and restraint. We shouldn't violently defend our own opinions, but we should express them. And now, that means it's not about competitiveness or just about winning. What assures that in Benedict's organization is the authority of the abbot, which of course might seem undemocratic. We elect our representatives to make decisions. And then if we don't accept them, we can vote them out. But it doesn't mean that It doesn't mean that they are necessarily authoritarian, because they make a decision which you don't agree with. You've elected them. Anyway, these are the sort of the checks and balances based upon basic humane principles, civilized values of listening. But the abbot himself must be obedient, he says, to the rule. That's to the spirit of the rule, and also to some degree to the letter of the rule. Everybody must follow the rule, he says, and do not rashly deviate from it. So then the rule is full of exceptions. It's not like a rule book. Lots of exceptions. And he says discretion is the mother of virtue. So knowing when and where, how to apply these principles is all important. That's why peaceful, civilized, open conversation is necessary, so that we can come maybe to a compromise. Life is about compromise, families, organizations, businesses, countries, but compromise. Nobody usually gets everything that they want. So all must follow the rule, and if you're going to deviate from it, do not do it rashly. Make sure you know what you're doing and agree on it. Don't follow your own will, he says. Don't just get into a party mentality. Think of the common good and think of the common rule. That is what protects the common good. And then he says, you can disagree with the abbot and you can tell the abbot that he's wrong, but you don't do it in an aggressive or a violent, or he says, defiant way. And the abbot himself must obey in everything, in that spirit. He's accountable to the community and to God. Less important matters, then, at the end of this chapter, Benedict says he can discuss these things. He can't make up his own mind entirely by himself, but less important matters, should be discussed with a smaller representative group of the community. So in this chapter, you have a very wise set of instructions on how to run a small society, which for Benedict should be as self-sufficient as possible. They were living in an agricultural world, and in a world of economic collapse. So he felt the community, in order to be peaceful, should be as self-sufficient as possible. But this is not a gated community. A long time ago, somewhere in England, actually, I was visiting a meditator, and in this sort of gated community, I was surprised they were living there. And it was a little, I've been in other countries, but it was a little strange. It was so protected and isolated, and it was, for the rich and the powerful, really. But the community that Benedict is building, as we are trying to build here in Bombo, has to have a set structure, has to have certain rules. But basically, it's open to the guest. A few days ago, a young woman, not so young actually, turned up, and she was a pilgrim on the Camino, and she asked if we provided hospitality, or could give her a room, bed for the night. We said yes, of course. So that kind of openness. But also Benedict, as you know, is very concerned about the pilgrims, the guests who we receive as Christ, and protecting the sick and the old, as well as the young in the community. And some clear references to the way the community, if it has a little bit left over, it should share that with the poor outside. So what sustains this way of living? Because it isn't it needs to be continuously, almost moment by moment, managed. Although not obsessively, but you can't leave it alone for very long. It needs to be continually rebalanced. So what sustains it? I think a personal sense of calling of each of its members, because each has freely chosen to be there. Second, of course, good leadership. And that's not going to be perfect leadership, just good leadership. There should be a common acceptance of the values and the style of the way of life, which is expressed in the rule. But the rule is not an enforced orthodoxy of belief, but it is something that needs to be commonly accepted. It's also characterized by discipline. He's very conscious that you're going to get strong-willed people who go through a period of defiance or refusal to do what they're asked to do. But so there's discipline, but also compassion and gentleness and adapting to the person individually. And then, of course, there needs to be a balance of life. We've just had a very busy week with these wonderful Canadian meditators, and now we're taking a little time to rebalance, not having to cook for so many people and so on. So we need a balance of life to avoid stress and to follow a daily routine that brings about a healthy mind and a healthy body. And all of this is based upon the fundamental reason for living, which is seeking God. Now, monasteries today are emptying or they're closing. Why is this wisdom of Benedict? How and why, and in what way will it bring benefit to our world? Well, I think very much through the oblate communities, our oblate community among them. In October, there's going to be, in September, there's a meeting of oblates from around the world in Sant Anselmo in Rome. And a number of our oblates are going to participate in that and share what we do. Not that we're perfect, but to share what we do and how we see it. And so I think that, and I think the wise leadership in the Benedictine world recognizes the importance of the oblate path as a way of bringing the wisdom of Benedict into the world today. And I'll just end with an article that you may or may not have read, but I would recommend that you read it. It was written by Adalbert Vogler back soon after John Main died. I asked him if he would write it for Monastic Studies, which I was editing at the time. And he chose, I don't know if I suggested it to him or he chose the theme from John Cassian to John Main. And Adalbert de Vogler died now, but he was a great scholar, a great Benedictine scholar, but also very open-minded and intelligent monk. And in writing this article, he obviously engaged with it very personally and deeply, and he spoke about John Main and John Cassian as representing two important figures in monasticism, particularly Western monasticism, because each of them was a bridge separated by 1,500 years, but each of them was a bridge. John Cassian became a bridge between Eastern Christian monasticism and Western Christian monasticism. He came from the deserts of Egypt, where he lived for 20 years, and he came to France, to the south of France. He actually came to Marseille in the south of France, where we're living 4 kilometers from a little village here called Marseille, which is very difficult for me to pronounce them correctly. So John Cassian, he says, is this sort of bridge between the East and Western churches. And John Main, he says, is another kind of bridge. And he was the bridge between of a greater ecumenism, the bridge between Christianity and other faiths. And this is at the heart of contemporary culture. We become multicultural, multi-religious, and we have to know how to handle that. We already see the dangers of racial prejudice and riot, and social disorder, and the intolerance of immigrants and so on. But how can we build in our society a just and peaceful society in which different faiths and different cultures can live together? So Albert de Vogüé says that what allowed John Main to be this sort of bridge was because of his teaching on meditation. His discovery of meditation, or initially in the East, which he always practiced as a Christian, and then his rediscovery of it in Cassian. And that's why we're here. That's why we meditated 20 minutes ago. And the interesting thing of this great Benedictine scholar was that he said what John Main recognized was that there was something missing in the rule. He called it a lacuna, something missing. And it was the shared contemplative practice. And by putting meditation into the common life, and we do here now in Bonneau, and have always done, integrating it into the divine office and the Mass, that is a significant evolution. I think it's something Benedict he wouldn't have said this to the only way of doing it, but he would have approved. And I think the bringing meditation into the way of life that Benedict describes is essential for the way the wisdom of the rule today can reach beyond individuals and oblate communities and community like Bonneau, and to reach out into the world. So we don't have time now, I think, but I'd be very happy and interested if any of you had comments you'd like to share or different perspectives on it. Maybe you could. I'd be happy if you wanted to send them in. Maybe we can arrange a online conversation about it when there's more time. Thank you very much.
Well, Laurence, I think you'll find that there will be some comments coming through in the chat as I thank you, and all of those chats are collated faithfully by, I think it's Mary, and sent to you. So you will get some feedback from just this time together. And I've taken just a few notes. Well, no, I've actually taken a lot of notes, but just in summary, that the rule of St. Benedict was based on a lived experience, and that all are welcome. and that reminding us that this was in the Dark Ages, where St. Benedict's was reshaping how to live. And it seems to me that that is what we are able to offer. And I love the image of bridges, that we're all a bridge. Each of us here are a bridge, and we can help to reshape the lives around us and how to live in that spiritual space of love and freedom and hospitality, and the sense of being an open cloister, remembering that silence, that moderation that brings joy. So thank you so much, and we'll just end with our Benedictine prayer. May the divine assistance be always with us, and remembering our absent brothers and sisters. Amen. Thank you.
Can I second Janet's remarks? And thanks to you, Father Laurence. And yes, she's quite right. I shall be collating the chats that are coming into the chat box at the moment and sending them on to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Can I just say, so I was just looking at them. Oh, somebody. There's somebody asked about where to find that essay by article by Adalbert of Ogwe. You should find it on the website. It should be on the Oblate page, I think, actually, in resources. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Turning to next week, our speaker is going to be Mark Kenny, who is a novice of our Oblate community. For 24 years, he was a teacher and school chaplain. He's an Anglican priest living in East London with his partner and 2 Westies, who are delightful little dogs. And the title of his talk is Cultivating the Landscape of the Soul, which I think will follow on nicely from what Father Laurence has said to us this week. So it just remains for me to wish you all a happy and blessed week ahead, and I look forward to welcoming you all in Benedict's Well next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Janice. Thank you, Father Laurence.